Good morning and welcome to everybody from a very wet Valencia, Spain this morning. We're delighted that you've taken the time to join us today for how to efficiently and rapidly address segregation of duties risks in your ERP system. So I'm Emma and I'm here on the marketing team here at SafePass for those of you who don't know me, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Miller and Matt Gantner from the Altum Strategy Group and my colleague Scott Eloquin. So if you do have any questions throughout the session, then please feel free to pop those in the control panel, and we'll be addressing those at the end of the session today if there's time. If we don't, then we'll be sure to follow up with you in an email afterwards. So just a quick look at the agenda we'll be following today. So we'll start off with some brief introductions, make that as brief as possible, and then look at modern ERP solutions, the architecture, challenges customers face, identifying segregation of duties, and then how to keep that environment clean moving forward. So if Matt, you'd like to start off?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Definitely appreciate it, and thanks for having us today. So as Emma mentioned, my name is Matt Gantner. I am the founder and managing partner for a company called Altum Strategy Group. I've been in the ERP access management space for over 15 years, and we'll tell you a little bit more about Altum here in a couple minutes. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks everybody for taking the time to join us today. Like Matt, I've been in the provisioning and user access management, SOD, and risk management space for about 15 years now, spanning a number of different roles, so both in industry and in the consulting space. With that, Scott, we'll kick it over to you.
Hey guys, welcome from sunny Texas. My name is Scott Eloquin. I'm the Chief Customer Officer for Safeas, and I spent many years with Big Four doing Oracle implementations and support work, and I'm looking forward to this presentation today.
Great. So we just want to give you a quick overview of Altum and then really kind of dive into the content. But really, there's 4 key service pillars within the firm. The first one is our project management and digital transformation pillar. So that is anything from software selection through deployment. We're not a system implementation partner in the classic sense. We're more extension of the management team to really make sure that the business is achieving the business value from the investment. The second major pillar, which is a core focus of today's discussion, is around application security. So think of Oracle, Workday, SAP, NetSuite in terms of the application itself, helping to build, design, and deploy security roles to end users, and then also deploying the traditional 3 lines of defense being access, process, and risk. Our third major pillar is around all things kind of data. So think of that as data governance, data classification, data architecture. And then our fourth and final pillar is around business process design and controls integration. So really helping companies think through opportunities to either design a really efficient and streamlined business process, or looking for opportunities to optimize your existing business processes and then really comply with your key controls, be it SOX, be it other regulatory requirements like NERC, FERC, etc. So with that, Scott, I'll hand it over to you to do a quick overview of SafePass.
Sure. So Safepass, so we've been in the GRC business for almost 20 years now. We are very focused on governance, risk, and compliance, especially as it relates to ERP systems. And actually, if you do your homework, you'll see that Gartner's recognized Safepass as one of the only truly end-to-end integrated risk management platforms. Our CEO, Adil Khan, actually wrote the book on GRC for Oracle applications, which is really kind of where we've come from. And we like to think of ourselves as thought leaders in the space. So in terms of kind of an end-to-end approach around access risk, transaction risk, and process risk, we have built a platform, which I think Emma will show you the next slide, really goes end-to-end across everything. And if you look at this particular slide, which I know is very busy, I mean, there really are those 3 major areas: the access controls, the controls monitoring, as well as process controls. Today, there's a little box that will pop up here. We're going to focus on really the first step. The thing that got us to this webinar today is looking in your system to identify segregation of duties risks specifically related to conflicts. And actually, if you go to the next slide, Emma, for those who attended our last health check, or you'd like to see it, our last webinar, it's on our website. We talked about how you can very quickly, in 5 days, do a rapid health check to look for exposure to risks and related to segregation of duties using the SafePass platform. And what we've done is, since we're a cloud solution, we actually consume information, pull this against our policy engine, and then we provide really specific information of areas of the business that you should focus on. So in terms of, if you're driving in the car, it's a little light coming on saying you should check your engine. What we didn't talk about last week is, once that light comes on, what do you do about it? And so the focus of this webinar today will be to say, I now have information about where I should focus my time. What do I really do to assess the risk based on that? And how do I build a plan to really fix the problems that may pop up?
Well, yeah, thanks, Scott. And that's a really great overview of the key points we want to talk to in the assessment. So with this slide, let's just jump right into some of the security models that we often see in modern ERPs. In this slide, you'll see on the left an example of, yes, on the left, an example of both the Oracle E-Business Suite and security model, and you'll see the multiple layers in each of the different approaches. We see, starting at the top, users' responsibilities and roles and privileges, and we really see kind of the complexity that the access models in both the Oracle suite, how that's built. And it's not just the Oracle suite that's complex, it's really each ERP that has these items that really make it tough to, via spreadsheet, assess the risk and measure the SOD risks that come out of responsibilities, roles, and kind of the key false positives that a lot of teams see when they use spreadsheets to analyze the security model itself. Matt, anything to add to that?
No, I think just to build on that, so as Dan touched on, each ERP out there has its own unique security structure. So I think that's a key point to just kind of hit home. As a result of that, it's really going to be important to make sure that you have a team member or a third party that you work with that really understands the intricacies of each of those security models within your respective ERP, and you have a tool or a process to proactively or detectively monitor for those SOD and sensitive access considerations within your platform. And especially as you look at the growth of cloud platforms, be it ERP, be it a CSP or other, there's a lot of information and cross-pollination of data that passes across those platforms. So key piece as you look at kind of the future of the business, and a lot of businesses staying remote for the foreseeable future, it's going to be really important to make sure you have your arms around the SODs that take place across your multiple platforms, be it on-prem, be it cloud, or be it a hybrid environment. So that's another key piece just to kind of talk through.
Okay, and as we look at the next slide here, another example of a more of a role-based security model with NetSuite, and moving on and do SAP. Again, roles built, global permissions, authorization, transaction, T-codes underneath that, really showing the complexity of how the structures are really far too complex to really put in that access database, and really require a lot of understanding from the teams, a robust tool that can really support the SOD monitoring. So as we look at this structure, and as we move into the next slide, which is kind of an overview of the position-based security model, we look at some of the complexities of this type of a scenario where users are, through an HCM org hierarchy, are assigned a number of roles, which may be a manager or an employee, and those two roles may be a superset of one another. Manager, including both the access of the employee and some additional transaction codes. I think one of the key points to point out on this slide is that There often are three really common challenges come as a result of the org-based structure model. This, again, the duplication of multiple access, getting to that manager-employee type structure. And then the highly structured approach often takes a lot of time to adjust, analyzing the impact of a new transaction code in the SAP environment, or a new business process change when we talk about Workday. And then also kind of the third bullet point, and you can see this in the graphic, is changes are sometimes processed using very creative solutions. And we've given kind of an extreme example with Peter having the shop floor employee access, but also the system administrator role. But these are actually things that we've actually seen in the environment where where teams have really no other option but to assign those creative roles. Scott, Matt, anything to add here?
I think what I have is a question. I mean, most customers that I work with don't run one system. And I'm just trying to get a sense of, I'm running Workday for HCM, but I've got eBusiness Suite or Oracle ERP Cloud for financials and maybe manufacturing. And I guess I'm trying to figure out how you balance those in terms of looking at not just the hybrid environment from an infrastructure perspective, but from an ERP perspective. I mean, that just feels like that creates a lot of variables and a lot of challenges.
Yeah, Scott, that's a really great question. And the two systems you chose, Workday for HCM and Oracle for financials, is a very common one that we see out in the market today. And both just have two different security structures. So let me talk through that and some of the unique challenges there, and then let's talk about how we've helped companies kind of bridge the gap, if you will, between an HCM that's disparate from your core financial system. So specifically, like if you think of the Workday security structure, it is very much position-based, right? So it's very much about assigning a set of privileges and domains to that employee within that system. Whereas if you look at Oracle in this example, you have a series, you could have one or multiple responsibilities assigned to that user. So really, in order to make that kind of a more secure environment, one, you need to have somebody focused on making sure that users are set up and provisioned correctly within your HCM platform. And then that same integration of flow of security needs to also be passed into your financials platform, in this example, Oracle, right? So it's really important to have a comprehensive strategy to, one, provision access consistently. So, right, really having a workflow or an enabled tool that can talk to both of those systems, and basically when a new employee is on board or when there's a change to the employee status, somebody is able to go into that one unified platform and create that provisioning or change request in a tool like SafePass. The second piece to that is making sure that you have monitoring of SOD and sensitive access risk within each of those respective systems. So in this example, Workday HCM, and then on the Fin side, more on the Oracle front. So it's important to understand all of your unique SOD and sensitive access risks within those two systems. But then more importantly, as I mentioned before, it's important to make sure you're looking at that as a cross-application risk. So you understand the true impact of what a user can do in HCM that could impact, for example, payroll. By changing compensation in HCM, can I process payroll through financials? If yes, that's certainly a risk, and it could be an okay risk, right? Assuming that the appropriate mitigation is in place, or it could be one that is flagged and then is driven through remediation to remove either both sides of that access or one side of that access. Does that answer your question? It's a good question.
No, thank you for that. It still sounds hard to do, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, when clients engage us to help them with this journey, oftentimes it feels like, man, this is really daunting. This is a lot of work. And really what it comes down to is boiling it down to its simplest parts, right? And when you think of the simplest parts, it's one, making sure that from a business standpoint, you understand where do you want key activities to take place within a business process. So where does it start? Where does it end? And really what we walk through first is kind of designing that process flow or reviewing process flows That then allows us to then help organizations define what is their separation of duties and sensitive access rule set, which we then use to manage and monitor that the appropriate person is performing the right and approved task within the defined system. So it is a very manageable process once you kind of break it down to those very simple building blocks, and then it's very easy to build back up and make sure that it's a very sustainable solution going forward.
So as we kind of talk through the separation of duties and kind of talk through kind of an evolutionary overview of kind of the journey that most organizations go through. Starting in moving left to right, we start with the manual process, of course, moving to the automated process and then under the preventative approach, which getting back to that manual process, you know, that's really a quite painful process, I think, Scott, to hit your question. The manual process is typically characterized by many spreadsheets, many system exports, many role lists, user lists, and really almost a full-time job for many team members to export these lists, do the analysis, and come back in days, weeks, and later on when the access may have changed. So in these scenarios, the review is often much older than the data, and things may have already changed in your environment in today's high velocity types of situations. We move into the automated process, which is a more mature model. Those are the dedicated tools, the tools like SafePass, which analyze the risks across the environment in automated fashion. They really get down to the transaction or authorization level. In SAP, exactly that, the transaction, the ability to create, change, modify, those types of activities, and really help to remove some of the false positives that come out of the manual process. And those automated processes is really one of the key points is the immediate response time. Run a risk analysis on a role, run a risk analysis on a user, and really see that feedback in real time. What is the risk at this point? And as we get all the way over to the right side with the preventative approach, we see these types of automated processes being implemented in the provisioning process. So what happens if a role is added to a specific user in advance of that role truly being added? The transaction level, authorization level is really monitored and utilized. And again, you know, I can't stress enough how important it is to really get ahead of the provisioning and really analyze on the front end. Any questions? Anything to add, Scott or Matt?
I think Dan did a great job covering that.
Yeah, not for me.
Okay. So one of the big questions we get quite a bit is what is the business value that organizations typically see out of these types of assessment? And really the first big point is visibility, giving organizations kind of a snapshot of where they are, moving into the areas of exposure, providing a roadmap to improvement, and continuing to improve as we get all the way over to the right. The continuous improvement is really where most organizations want to get, but where we see some with questions and some challenges is really kind of in those first three spots, needing visibility, needing to understand the exposure, and sometimes thinking they have exposure in some areas, but not being totally sure. And I think what the values of these types of assessments are really focusing the business in the right areas and confirming or maybe showing new areas where organizations haven't previously thought they may have some risk.
So Dan, I have a question for you. Yeah. I mean, great, that makes perfect sense. We want to continuously improve. We want business value. But sometimes I get a feeling that, at least with customers that I work with, that they really don't have the luxury of doing that. They're preparing for the test. They know what questions they're going to be asked. They just want to check the box. they'd love to be able to do what you say, but at the end of the day, they've still got to get into college. They've still got to pay their mortgage, whatever they've got to do. I mean, can you help me kind of understand how I can balance dealing with the auditors and the statutory requirements and dealing with business efficiency? I mean, is there like a middle ground there?
Yeah, Scott, there's a middle ground, right? And there is a way to achieve both meeting your compliance and regulatory requirements while also making sure that your business is running efficiently and, more importantly, securely. So when you think of the process that Dan walked through on the prior slide, right? So if you think of companies that are going through more of that manual process today, and there certainly are systems out there that do not have necessarily a GRC tool that can support them with this. So that manual process is something that is very real and causes quite a bit of pain within an organization. And if you kind of think through that evolution, because these two kind of go hand in hand to that really preventative automated solution and the continuous monitoring, it is truly a crawl, walk, run type of progression. So now to bring that back to your question, basically when you think of passing that test or passing the respective audits, it all starts with really making sure that, one, you're developing the right framework that allows you to identify the key risks within your business. Now, what I mean by that is a lot of companies will take kind of a standard rule set, throw it against the business, and they'll come out with all of these conflicts and all these violations, and that can be very overwhelming, right? And it really doesn't align to their business. So the first pragmatic step to take is going through and performing a risk identification and a risk rating exercise against those risks to truly understand what is the core risk financially or operationally for my business. That's piece one. Once you identify that, it's very easy to then identify where are there opportunities for improvement within the business process themselves, or more importantly, if we can't make any changes to the business process, what are the corresponding mitigating controls that we can place on top of that to reduce the risk to a measurable and acceptable level for both internal operations, but also for external third-party reporting requirements, right? Be it SOX, be it other regulatory requirements. And by taking that approach and really setting that foundation, you're going to be able to really kind of achieve that balance, because now you're looking at the things that matter most. You're able to triage and remediate those items as they're generated and reported on, which then allows you to meet your compliance obligations and at the same time continue to run a very efficient business.
And in doing that, you're assuming that we were able to look across applications. We could extrapolate the business process rules from SAP, SuccessFactors, Concur, e-business suite, ERP cloud, HCM cloud, Workday. You can bring it up to that level. Once you create a common framework, then you can take all the business stuff going forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that vernacular that you hit on, that's key, right? So anytime we've gone in to help companies kind of establish that governance framework, really starting at the access layer. So think of it as the foundation to your house, really putting that foundation in place for your house. That's the first thing you want to go make sure you have commonality and agreement on is, what is my vernacular? What are we really going after? What are the key systems? What are the key processes that I care about to meet either operational reporting requirements or external reporting requirements?
Very good. And I won't give attribution because I don't have permission, but I just got a quote from the panel, from one of the folks that's watching. We had a slogan: get clean and stay clean.
Yes.
So use the audit to get you clean, and then use tools and education to be sustainable. Then future audits and risks will be easier to manage.
Absolutely.
100%.
This will be one of our panelists in the next webinar, I'm quite sure. Or he'll never ever submit a question ever again to the webinar.
Yeah. No, and that's really where, once to that point, right? Once you progress up that crawl, walk, run to the continuous improvement, now it's just staying clean, right? So it becomes more efficient. You know what your pain points are. You can run that SOD or sensitive access report on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, and you're going to know exactly where your risks are, and you're going to be able to see very easily where had there been changes in my environment that I need to go back and either revisit and or address.
I think too, it's that staying clean is going to enable teams to look to new systems and look for additional risks and really spend the time really on value add activities and being more thorough in their analysis across the organizations.
Well, the next question, which for me leads us to the next slide, is, so how can I tell how I'm doing? I mean, as a company, I'm doing everything I can. I've got all the tools in place. I'm firing triggers and alerts, and I'm trying to keep up with stuff. But can you kind of give us some guidance so I can at least evaluate myself on how well my systems are working with regard to this kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, as part of the qualitative analysis, as part of our assessment methodology, we really look at a lot of key points, and I'll, really run through them pretty briefly here. But all of these key points, and specifically the first one, do the roles and groups meet the requirements for users? Are we using a position-based role in SAP that doesn't reflect the current version of the organization? So there's that role bloat or role expanse that we've seen too much. What does that fit the need? The next piece there is, does the provisioning policy really help prevent security violations? Are we going to the right person to have the access approved, and do they really understand what access they're providing to the users? As we move to the next one, it's that super user access. What's involved? What is a super user activity and what is not, and how we differentiate between those two types of activities. And then, this goes hand in hand with the provisioning policy, is the verification from managers periodically and doing those user access reviews within the system. And then just how do you detect the segregation of duty policies? Do you have a team member who's looking at spreadsheets as roles are being requested or added, or is that a weekly, monthly, or semi-annual process? Kind of the next one there is your data. Looking at the roles, how do the roles help you protect the sensitive data and the particular functions that are of high risk and, in that sense, high value to your organization? And then, of course, the one that comes as a particular point of interest to a lot of the auditors in many organizations is, what does the configuration control look like, and how do we make sure that the right users are making the right changes to the system at the right time? Again, master data. The world, it seems to be kind of functioning on a highly data dependent model these days. Data being kind of the crown jewel of a lot of organizations. Is really, how do organizations protect that, and how do they keep the wrong hands out of that and the right hands into their data to make the approved changes? And of course, last but not least is, what about your terminated employees? Are they being appropriately removed from the system kind of day of their separation from the organization? Anything to add to that, guys?
No, I think just to build on that real quick is, so what Dan just walked through are a lot of the questions that you can ask yourself as an organization to basically figure out, do you have some of those things in place? Do you not have other things in place? And I think by going through that, to Scott's point, you're going to really be able to understand just at a high level kind of where your gaps are. And then now you can really deep dive into the areas where you've identified gaps and either figure out, do we have the right people that we can put in place to kind of close that gap? Do we need to develop a stronger process, or do we need to enable supporting technology to help us drive some automation and some monitoring of any of those gaps within your environment?
Well, and I also think that these types of questions help you prioritize. It's kind of like three-dimensional chess. I've got all these things, but have I got all these different systems? And where do I have financial risk, transaction risk, customer service risk? I mean, at some point, you're going to figure out where your hot spots are so you can focus your attention on things that I think Matt had talked about materiality before. It's also about impact to customers. It's fulfillment of contracts. It's other things. But I mean, you got to do first things first. So to be able to look at all of the risks holistically, look at how material they are, and then how high a probability of those occurrence is going to let you sort them in the order that you need to address them. And then you just have to systematically take them down one at a time. And I think the one thing that to me is daunting, which I like having a methodology and I like having tools that let you extrapolate the data, is that, in the good old days, you had ERP and it was all in one system and all of it happened in one place. And now with the proliferation and the investment in cloud architecture, I think Gartner's saying that $6 out of $7 of all new investment in software is going into cloud, even for big vendors like SAP and Oracle. It's like, so almost by definition, you have a complex application architecture, which has systems of record for different data elements that sit in different platforms. So to make sure you have governance in the right place and that the relationships between those systems are well enough understood, not just so you can manage risk, but so you can do a good job, is crucial. And honestly, I think if you didn't have a really structured approach to go through this process, it would be really easy to become overwhelmed.
Yep, absolutely. I think, Scott, just to build on what you were saying about cloud architecture, I mean, there's not only is there the investment from the large software providers to invest more in their cloud solutions, but also there is more development by companies, both public and private, where they're developing proprietary applications within cloud platforms, right? And there's a lot more containerization of applications than there ever has been, right? So that's going to continue to grow. So to your point, it's really going to be important to, one, get your arms around your entire environment, and then secondly, to your point, triage and prioritize what systems you need to go after first. And then, as Dan mentioned, kind of grow that process out into other systems over time. So just kind of take that all the way through in terms of, bringing down the overall magnitude of the effort to a very kind of contained and pragmatic approach.
Yeah, 100%. And as we look at kind of the previous slide there, just looking at kind of the maturity model and really asking kind of yourselves where you fall on that spectrum and where some of your key processes are, just how manual are there, and has your organization really identified the key systems that need to be assessed with a more robust process to really help many of the executives sleep at night. How they review their rule set and how they're planning to deploy those within the solutions, building out from the inter-system role to an intra-system role, and really looking kind of from across your SAPs and Concurs and HCM and financial systems, how those all put together, and then getting to that automated and continuous monitoring environment where those processes are again in place and really kind of are ingrained into the system and take place as users are added to the system, roles or changes to the standard change management process, to really make the process stick again through that training and repetition that is also important in that kind of stay clean stage in the process. So as we move into the next slide here, a lot of questions, we at Altum and the team at SafePass, I'm sure they get this question a lot, is what are the benefits of an assessment? I think the biggest one that we've hit on in a number of different ways throughout the presentation is increase visibility, discover strengths and weaknesses, identify security control leaks. By leaks, the cross plant access in the different kind of role-based environments, the ranges for transaction codes that we sometimes see, the ranges for the star access in SAP. After the increased visibility comes, the ability to prioritize and really looking at what risks are in the environment and really enabling the business to align those to strategic initiatives. Build the case for the justification, mitigation, and elimination of problems altogether if possible. Once the team has kind of the ability to prioritize, they can really build that roadmap to remediation. Again, the removal, risk mitigation, and strategic goal alignment to strategic goals and initiatives. Once along with that path, built into the path to remediation is the evaluation of the controls objectives. Does the security model still hold true? Again, getting back to the organizational structure. Is the same organizational structure in place, or do we need to reanalyze that? And finally, the last piece is really the approach to improvement. How do we, with our path and our ability and our new visibility to what we now know, how do we tactically put that into production? How do we change the access in a way to, I think Scott made the point earlier, to really allow the business to run effectively and continue to run while these changes are moving through the environment? That can be kind of a challenge for a lot of folks, and it's hard. It's a complex problem to have. And then again, getting back into bringing those additional items and solutions into scope.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our session today, and we have had some questions come in. So Stuart asks, I presume you see lots of change from manual to automated processes as companies embark on their digital transformations. So this must help with improving segregation of duty tool rule sets, right? Anyone want to answer that one?
Yeah, definitely. I can take it. So companies going through digital transformation really have, when I say digital transformation, let me kind of qualify that a little bit. So companies are either upgrading their existing or legacy financials, HCM, just kind of broad-based enterprise platform, or companies that are putting in new technology to support their growth, are really at a good point to take advantage of going through the exercise of identifying your risks, prioritizing your next steps, and really building that into your broader digital transformation program. Because then as you're going through that transformation, or that you're able to take advantage of lessons learned in real time, and then really go through and identify where changes can be made or need to be made to develop the most secure platform, but also efficient platform for your company on a go-forward basis. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that was great. Thanks, Matt.
It does.
Okay,
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, my whole career, I've never worked from home, and I'm sitting home right now. And I don't know if that's Dan, if you and Matt are at home. I know Emma's at home. How does COVID affect everything we've talked about? Most of the people I know that were working in an office 14 months ago are working someplace else now. And I just wonder what this has done to the way you think about this, the way you approach it, your methodology for assessing it. I mean, what's that?
Yeah, Scott, certainly, both myself and Dan were working from home. The broader Altum team is all working from home. And to your point, the world has changed quite a bit in the last 14 months. So what we've seen is historically, we've seen a very concentrated set of users within an office. Now they're all spread across the country, and in some cases around the world, especially with organizations really still trying to figure out how to re-enter, or will they ever re-enter an office environment. So with having all those users and team members kind of scattered around the world, it's become even more important that organizations have their arms around the concept of least privilege and around SOD and sensitive access, because it's going to be really important as we continue to grow, with this model, that one, you have your arms around who is able to do what and in what platform, right? Number one. Number two, it's going to be important to make sure that you have the appropriate security in place to access your core applications, be it securing your laptops as endpoints, be it your network, be it home networks. How are you going to secure that? Because that's going to be your key point of entry. And then number three, it's making sure that as organizations continue to operate in this remote style, that companies are able to continually touch base with their teams to really make sure that one, they have everything they need to be successful, but number two, that they're on their schedule completing all of the necessary tasks that they need, and there's no kind of breakage, if you will, in terms of the process or the efficiencies within the system. So it has been a very large paradigm shift, and there's definitely key considerations that exist today that go back 14, 18, 24 months ago, certainly weren't part of the scope of what we would do in terms of an assessment or in terms of helping a company through a transformation or journey like this.
And I think just to add on to that, it's been a very interesting journey to see, going back with ERP really lowering walls between teams and different processes, and now with COVID, the beginning, those walls kind of went back up, and what was easily a over the cube wall conversation really has become harder. And with the adoption of these video conferencing type of tools, we're starting to see that wall come back down again. And I think that's one of the big shifts that I think everybody knows and everybody realizes, but still it's a big change for most organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I have another question here come in. Okay, so on many occasions, there's no option to remediate the risk because the removal of access is not an option because of various reasons. So in such cases, do you help the clients with the right mitigating controls? Do you have a library of recommended mitigating controls for the risks?
Yeah, great question. So that is certainly something that we have helped organizations with. So really, when you think of how we would approach that, the first piece is certainly identifying where those risks exist. Number two, it's assessing the company's current risk and controls matrix, or RCM. If they don't have one, that's certainly something we can help organizations build or optimize. And then in order to do that, we also look for gaps in existing RCMs that we are able to fill based on our experience, based on our accelerators, based on our library, to really help companies kind of achieve some efficiencies with controls, and then by using those controls, appropriately mitigate that risk to the acceptable level where access cannot be removed.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I know in the SafePass platform, we can create compensating controls, for example, using our monitor pass capabilities. Obviously, some of those are unique to particular clients, but we obviously have a catalog that can be used as a starting point to help those organizations.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, let's see if we have anything else here.
Emma, I think you have another question out there, actually.
Okay, so recently it's been a constant challenge to address interface risk assessment where the ERP is integrated with other third-party tools. Generally, the processes here are manual and detective instead of automated and preventative. So how can we address that?
And so that's a great question, and it's a very common challenge, especially in today's world where there's multiple SaaS applications or just multiple applications in general working within an environment. So the first thing to understand is, one, what are the business processes that take place within the ERP itself? And then number two, what are the components of that business process that take place in third-party applications? And the reason that that understanding is key is because then it will really allow you to appropriately secure each of those applications individually, and then it'll allow you to then put in a process or solution like SafePass to monitor both of those applications through the use of technology to drive to more of that automated preventative approach.
Thanks for that, Matt. Okay, and Carlos asks, how much time is needed to know the current state of the security? 2 months, 3 months, and how can I make a budget of time for it?
And also, what would you tell management so they would understand why you were doing it?
Yeah, so basically to do an assessment, so I'll kind of give you a range for both an assessment versus a deployment. So if you just want to kind of do a health check, and a good analogy to think about is, if you have a car and you need to take your car to the dealership, to Scott's earlier analogy, because you're seeing the warning lights on the dash, to do that type of assessment, to just understand what is my overall health of my car, what is the overall health of my environment as it relates to security and to SODs. That assessment is anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks to really kind of dig in and dive in to really understand what are the pain points, where are the critical areas of focus, and then develop a roadmap to essentially remediate or define an approach to address those areas. Kind of thinking about it broader, like if you think of a more comprehensive, security redesign, for example, that could be anywhere between 3 to 6 months, again, depending on the size and scope of your environment. And then in terms of deploying an access management solution that would help you with separation of duties analysis, sensitive access analysis, privileged access management, which is kind of that emergency break glass type of scenario, and then also provisioning, that's anywhere between 2 to 3 months, again, depending on number of systems and scope, and depending on number of rules, specifically separation of duty and sensitive access rules that will need to be defined.
Yeah, and to layer onto that, the SOD automated health check that we do that provides you guys the data to do your analysis, it's 5 days on the front end, and then the implementation is what you said, 2 to 3 months, really depending on the scope.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think this question might be for you, Scott, going back to your points about COVID and least privilege. So Stuart asks, would you change this approach for new employees onboarding as you may have a lower level of trust? Are you there, Scott?
I was commenting on how interesting that question was. I didn't know you were asking me.
I'm sorry.
Dang, I don't necessarily see a differentiation in trust. I would think that you're going through similar screening. I guess I would want to put a security model in place that assumed kind of the same about everybody, unless it was maybe a temporal position, maybe something that was a contingent worker, something like that. So I don't necessarily see that. I guess I'm more the software guy than the risk guy. I mean, what do you guys think?
I think going back to kind of those key questions, I would definitely kind of look at elements which are critical to the organization: master data, system administration, and other kind of highly sensitive financial transactions that, maybe you start that employee with less access and kind of build that trust and build that access from that perspective as they, kind of pass the 30, 60, 90, or whatever that time frame is your organization determines. It's really going to be an organizational decision. It's definitely something you could do, but it really depends on the position too.
Absolutely. Let's take another question here from Robert. Robert asks, can SafePass manage database access for SAP HANA?
So yes, SafePass basically has an open interface. So in terms of how we deliver it, we basically provide the way to ingest that either through a web service or through more of a batch transaction, depending on the system of origin. And so we can definitely do that.
Okay, another question here. With the SOD rule sets that were mentioned, are they included with the tool?
They are. We have a catalog of, oh boy, last time I looked, it's about 1,600 different rules that are kind of come in the box. You can modify those as needed. And frankly, if your business process is mandated, you can develop your own pretty easily.
And that's really where you want to go through and kind of take that standard out of the box rule set and really tailor it to meet the needs of your business, to what we were talking about earlier. Because if you run the standard out of the box rule set, it may be too many types of risks that are not relevant. And to Scott's point, you may not have all of the risks that are relevant to your business captured. So going through that risk assessment and kind of making sure that the risks that are defined are appropriate for the business is really key to enabling the tool.
Yeah. Okay, well, I can't see any other questions unless somebody else can. So I just want to say, put my camera back on so everybody can see me. So I just want to say a huge thank you to our amazing panelists today and to everybody who has joined us for this great session. We will be having a follow-up session around privileged access management in the next few weeks, and we'll be sharing an article, blog post around privileged access management as well that we can gladly share with everybody who's attended our call today. So a big thank you to you panelists, and we'll be seeing you all again in the very short future. Anybody have anything to say? Any last words?
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Oh, I did forget, actually, you do have contact details there on the screen. If anybody would like to get in touch with us, you know, we are on hand for a friendly chat around any concerns, any pain points, anything you'd like to discuss around SOD. And feel free to reach out to us if you'd like a copy of the deck, and you should be receiving a recording of the session anyway for your reference. So yeah, so thank you and have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you very soon.
Thanks. See ya.
Bye.